thing again.
Yes, sir.
We're going to triple it.
Okay, awesome. Just making sure.
All right, this evening we are in chapter 34. We'll pick up with verse 13. Now you recall earlier Shechem and his father had gone and tried to negotiate for Dinah. Hamar's doing the negotiating, and as we saw in the early part of the chapter, Jacob just kind of stands there, and it appears that Dinah's brothers are doing the negotiating. And what we saw there in verses 11 and 12 is Shechem agrees to pretty much pay whatever kind of dowry they want, and then we see that they agree to it, but as we'll see as we begin in verse 13, they were setting them up for something a little more sinister. They'd already plotted their revenge. And it's also that we'll see in the events of the latter part of chapter 34 that apparently the town of Shechem was not very big. And we'll see why here shortly. Verse 13, it says, "But Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor with deceit, and spoke to them because he had defiled Dinah their sister. And they said to them, We cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us." Now, what's that?
I said that's interesting. Law is even around him.
Well, it wasn't, that really had nothing to do with the law at this particular point. It was the Abrahamic covenant. Because remember, God had made the covenant with Abraham that beginning with him, he said all of his descendants would be circumcised, and that would be the physical symbol that they were under the covenant, which included, by the way, and a lot of people don't really stop to think through this, but that wasn't just Isaac, that included Ishmael too. Now the fact that the Shechemites are not within this tells us that they are not Ishmaelites. They don't have, they're Canaanites that descended from the people that were already there. They're essentially pagans. But of course, Simeon and Levi, who were doing the negotiating at this particular point, convinced them that, you know, this is just a family tradition here or something. Notice that there's no indication that this has anything to do with their religion or who they worship. They just say that, you know, our people. They almost propose it as a cultural thing. And if you want us to intermarry with you, then if we're going to become one people, then you've got to adopt this custom as well. So they clearly agree to it. But theologically speaking, it does tell us one thing. Has anybody caught the significance of the circumcision rite at this point? Well, it means Abraham had passed it on to Isaac, who passed it on to Jacob and Esau, and they were practicing it at this point.
Did they really understand it, you think?
I can't help but think that they would at least, if anything else, have been curious as to why. So
they would have at least understood that this sets us apart. Makes
it
us
sets them
different from
apart.
the people around
Yeah.
us.
But it tells us again that Jacob enforced this. Which also makes you wonder, and again, we have absolutely no way of knowing this at all. But since it began with Abraham, the question is, did Laban's family know anything about this? Now, keep in mind, Laban was not descended from Abraham, but from Abraham's brother. And we don't have any indication that this was practiced with the rest of the family, but we have to wonder, did they know about it? Or did they ask?
Especially considering they wanted to control him.
Mm-hmm. But in any event, what we see here is that they tell him that, well, we can't intermarry with you under these circumstances. And verse 15 says, only on this condition will we consent to you, if you will become like us in that every male of you be circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live with you and become one people. Now, this confirms for us at this point, Jacob did have other daughters than just Dinah. We don't have a clue how many or from which mother, but obviously there had to have been more. Although I would suggest at this point that Rachel probably was not the mother of any of them. Because Bible makes it pretty clear Rachel only had 2 kids, and there's no indication anywhere that she gave birth to any daughters. So they had to have come from the other 3. We just don't have any idea how many of them there were. But anyway, it says only on this condition, and notice it doesn't just say you two, it says every male among you. What's that?
Whole city.
The whole town had to consent to this. Now, this tells me not only are there apparently not that many of them, but the fact that they, as we'll see, consent to it, and it doesn't occur to them to take a few at a time, but rather they consented to it as the whole town at once. They didn't have a clue what was coming.
Yeah, they might have rethought it.
What's that? All right. Verse 17. But if you will not listen to us to be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and go. Now, notice here, this is singular. Take our daughter. Which one are they talking about now? Dinah. This is Dinah. And this also is the first indication that we have that they were still holding Dinah. Dinah was, she'd not only been raped, she'd been kidnapped. They weren't letting her go, but they were at this point essentially threatening Shechem and Hamor. Like, we'll take our daughter and go. Now, the words seemed reasonable to Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son, and the young man did not delay to do the thing because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. Now, he was more respected than all the household of his father. Now, it's interesting that Shechem, who apparently, as we kind of surmise, probably a teenage boy at this point, 15, 16 years old maybe, that he's got more respect in the town than his own dad. Which, what does that tell us about who's running that household? But what's interesting...
And a kid that did what he did has more respect than his dad. That's not saying much for that town.
Probably isn't. But what is interesting, and again, this tells you that this guy was not by any means 20, 21, 22 years old. He had to have been still pretty young, because notice what it says about it. The young man did not delay to do the thing. In other words, when they said, you need to be circumcised. Now, ladies, I'm going to tell you right now, no man would consent to having this done without putting some thought into it. Because you're talking about something that for an adult would be pretty painful. Now, of course, we know when people what's that?
I'm thinking of Joshua with a whole army and everything. I'm like,
Well, when people practice this on their infant sons, I have read that a lot of times babies, because they're, a lot of their various nervous systems and things haven't developed, that it is not unheard of for a baby to sleep through this procedure and never feel a thing. But ladies, let me tell you, that ain't true of an adult. A man is going to hurt, and hurt bad.
And yet he couldn't wait to get it done.
But yet he can't wait to get it done, which again tells me he is so love struck over Dinah. And again, notice Dinah has been she's been sexually abused at this point and being held against her will in their house. What do you think she's thinking about all of this? I don't, what's that?
Get me out of here.
I'm venture to say that she probably isn't love struck with him, but yet he is so convinced that, surely she'll love me back. So he consents to have this done, and it says he didn't delay. I actually read that in one commentary that said, and of course we have no way of knowing, but one commentator even suggested that if he was in that much of a hurry, he might have gone and done it to himself.
Yeah.
What's that?
Ouch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
said,
Times 100.
whole army.
That just tells you that the boy he's love struck here. So whether he had it done or did it to himself, it says he didn't delay. So he apparently went out right then. Hamor we don't know about, but apparently it didn't happen too long after that. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, "These men are friendly with us. Therefore, let them live in the land and trade in it. For behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters in marriage and give our daughters to them." Now, once again, I think there's, even though it refers to this as the men of the city and calls this a city, I just can't even begin to imagine that there couldn't have been more than a few dozen.
Just considering the name of the city.
No. And the fact that, well, if it was named after Hamor's son, you figure the town probably hasn't been in existence for more than, 2 or 3 decades at most. So you wouldn't have that many people living here.
And it's likely a single clan.
Yeah. Probably all related to each other, which also might indicate why they want some, looking to get some fresh, new lemon in this group, because there might not have been that many, of their daughters to go around. The incentive on their part may have been that there was more men than women. And again, that's all we can do is speculate at this point.
Well, part of the incentive's in the next 2 verses.
Yeah, the real plan, let's go ahead and get to that. The real plan, as Merrill just mentioned, isn't in trading wives, it's monetary. Verse 22 says, "Only on this condition will the men consent to us to live with us, to become one people, that every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised." And by the way, the fact that they knew what this was tells us that, this procedure or ritual, wasn't new, but apparently not practiced there. "Will not their livestock and their property and all their animals be ours? Only let us consent to them, and they will live with us." Now we get to the real issue. The people of Shechem know Jacob and his family are filthy rich. They've probably got more livestock than the entire rest of the town put together. And they're figuring if we can intermarry with them, at the very least, if we can't take their livestock outright after a generation or two, what's going to happen?
We're gonna inherit it.
We'll inherit it. Our sons, who are going to marry their daughters, will get their hands on some of it and give us about 20 or 30 years. We'll own every last bit of it. That's what they're after. They want Jacob's wealth. Now, the fact that God has blessed Jacob and the fact that God has apparently led Jacob and the Israelites, for what few there were at this point, not to intermarry with the Canaanites, what we see that will happen next, I'm pretty sure was not God's will, but it accomplished what God wanted the hard way. What's that?
Yeah. Hard way.
Yeah, the hard way.
Yeah, not the way he intended.
Verse 24. And all who went out of the gate of his city listened to Hamor and to his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city. Makes you wonder if they basically set up shop right there in the gate and just like, you want to leave the city? Or you want to come into town? Here's what you get. Yeah, what's that?
Pay the toll.
Get in line. But the fact that it says all of them, and this is what Simeon and Levi were trying to accomplish. Now, let me back up a little bit. Were Simeon and Levi Dinah's oldest brothers?
They were her real brothers.
Yeah, but were they the oldest?
No.
No.
Who was the oldest?
Reuben.
Reuben was. Now notice, nowhere in here is Reuben mentioned.
And usually it's the oldest son who does the negotiating, right?
But in this particular case, Reuben apparently has got nothing to do with this, which makes you wonder. Now, you can't help but figure that all the brothers knew what was about to go on. But apparently this was a plot hatched by Simeon and Levi, and I can't help but believe that Reuben basically is like, no, I don't think I want anything to do with this. Otherwise, Reuben, as the oldest brother, I can't help but believe that he would have been into this if he had consented to this.
He would have been leading it.
He'd have been leading the charge. But we're only told of Simeon and Levi. Now, by the way, the reason for all this is, and I think this is one of the reasons that Moses even gives us all the dirty details of this story. Who did Jesus descend from?
This is a trick question.
Which one of the brothers did he descend from?
Oh, Levi.
Jacob.
Judah. Yeah.
Judah.
Lion of Judah.
Judah is the fourth of Leah's sons. Also notice Judah is not mentioned. But now, on the other hand, it would make sense that Reuben would have been the ancestor of the royal tribe. Well, because, why?
Firstborn.
He's the firstborn. But Reuben's not, he's not the ancestor of Christ. Judah is number 4. Number 2, Simeon. Number 3, Levi. Now, just keep that in mind as we progress through this, because you will see that this is the whole reason this story is told to us, is it gives us the reason why Judah is the ancestor of Christ and not Reuben, Simeon, or Levi. We're being told why of Simeon and Levi now, because they did something that basically caused Jacob to pretty much reprimand them and disinherit them, because what they did accomplished, I believe, God's will, but it definitely was not the way God would have done it, and it did not meet with Jacob's approval. And then shortly we're going to see why Reuben pretty much takes himself out of the running. And then if we fast forward to the end of Genesis, one of the last things we're going to see in Genesis is when Jacob blesses his sons on his deathbed, he makes the prophetic pronouncement at that point that Judah will be the royal tribe. And people have wondered, like, why Judah? He was not the firstborn. Well, we're being told why here. All right, well, let's continue. Verse 25. Now it came about on the third day when they were in pain. You think? Now, I can't tell you from, but apparently, and from what I've studied, that after this particular procedure on an adult male, that the third day is when they are at their worst. Sort of you get sort of like
Delayed pain from a burn.
Delayed pain from a burn, that the first and second day you think, oh, this isn't so bad, and then it's like the second and third day that it turns out, oh, yes, it is. And you get worse before you get better. Well, apparently day 3 after this is when they are at their worst, and that a man who's, an adult who's had this done can barely walk, at least for about 3 or 4 days. It said, now it came about on the third day when they were in pain, that 2 of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword. And by the way, let me pause here. Notice they've got swords. People that you read about and say, oh, well, these folks they were in the Stone Age and they didn't have, no, they didn't. Where'd they get the swords from unless somebody knew metallurgy? A lot of the sciences that we think that these people back then didn't know about, yeah, they did. Now, whether the Jews themselves did, we don't know. Where they got the sword, we can only guess. But clearly, people of that day and age did know metallurgy. All right, each took his sword and came upon the city unawares and killed every male. When do you think they probably did this? When would you have been able to catch all the men at home completely off guard? Yeah, they probably snuck in at night. Plus, at this point, I doubt there was a whole lot going on in the town or wouldn't have been for about a week. And when they came busting in, the guy would have been next to defenseless. Said, came in, each took his sword, came upon the city unawares, and killed every male. And they killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house and went forth.
How rude.
What's that?
How rude.
Yeah. We see right there the proof. They had been holding Dinah in their household. Dinah had been kidnapped. And they had to go in and, for them, this was a rescue operation. Well, of course, I think they accomplished 2 things. One, revenge on the entire city, and 2, to rescue their sister.
Is there any significance to the detail he provides about killing them with the edge of the sword?
No, that's just
a slow way to die compared to being stabbed?
Well, they probably got hacked.
Hacked, yeah.
Yeah, but still, that's a slower way to die, a more painful and slower way to die than being stabbed with the sword.
Well,
So
but
maybe that's their way of making the punishment hurt even more.
well, look at it from their perspective. What are they accomplishing here?
Revenge.
They're getting revenge on what those guys did to their sister. So, do you think they wanted to make it
The
hurt?
death of 1,000 cuts is what
Yeah.
I'm getting at. Yeah.
Mhm.
But wasn't it really just the one guy that did the transgression and they made the all pay?
True, but we also know that Hamor was
In agreement.
he was in agreement with what went on.
Didn't
And-
punish his son in any way.
Yeah,
He was
no
protecting
punishment.
his son, too.
What's that?
He was protecting his son.
It's protecting his son. And if this was a little small town and Hamor was the city chieftain, do you not think the whole town probably knew what was going on? They're basically blaming.
Isn't that how they found out? Where they?
Yeah, because the only way they could have found out, or that somebody from the town went and told Jacob, because Dinah couldn't have run home and said, "This is what they did to me." They had her locked up in the house. Her brothers were out in the field, totally clueless as to what went on. Somebody from that town went and told Jacob. So yeah, by this point, The whole town knew about it.
The reason I asked that question is because in the TV series, The House of David, when young David is learning to be a soldier,
Uh-huh.
and the other soldiers are trying to teach him how to fight, one of the actual soldiers tells him, stab, don't slash.
Mm-hmm. Well, either way, it worked. All right. Let's see. Verse 27. Jacob's sons came upon the slain and looted the city because they had defiled their sister. Now, at this point, notice it doesn't just say Simeon and Levi. It says Jacob's sons. At this point, there's a good possibility that the rest of the brothers may have gotten in on the action. They didn't partake in the massacre, but they figured, they're dead now. We might as well join in. So they loot the whole town. They took their flocks and their herds and their donkeys and that which was in the city and that which was in the field, and they captured and looted all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives, even all that was in the houses. They've captured the entire town, killed off the men, looted the city. Now, unlike what the men of the city were trying to negotiate for, where they would intermarry with them, what do you think they actually did with the women and the children? They are now slaves. They're going to be taken back home and enslaved. Verse 30 says, Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, You have brought trouble on me by making me odious among the inhabitants of the land. In other words, the whole people around here that find out about this, well, they're going to think we just stink as neighbors. I mean, that's literally what he's saying here. Said, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and my men being few in number, they will gather together against me and attack me, and I shall be destroyed, I and my household. Now, we don't know how many Jacob had at this point. He's got 12 sons, of which half of them are still too young to fight. The men of that particular town are all now dead. So who's he talking about?
The next town over.
Yeah, where'd the Shechemites come from? They apparently were part of a larger clan that may have inhabited the nearby towns. And you don't massacre a whole town without somebody finding out about it and spreading the word.
Brother or father.
Yeah, and so Jacob at this point is afraid their relatives from the next town over are now going to come and exact their revenge on us.
We got the Hatfields and McCoys going on.
Yep, we got to get out of here. Which this tells us why, beginning in the next chapter, which we'll tackle on Wednesday, why they didn't stay in Shechem, which apparently was God's will for them to begin with. They did cross over the Jordan River into Canaan, which is where God wanted them, but they stopped before they got to the destination God intended. God wanted them to go further south to Bethel and to Beersheba, I think. But anyway, definitely to Bethel, which Jacob never made it that far. He had settled here. So this is again an example of how God got his way even in the midst of their disobedience. This wasn't God's way to do it, but God accomplished his will anyway. But at this point, yes, Jacob is probably scared that as soon as word gets out, well, their relatives from the next town over are going to come to exact their revenge. We got to get moving. And telling them this, Simeon and Levi have one response to their dad, which essentially tells us at this point, even though Jacob is the family patriarch, they have lost all respect for their dad because of this. Verse 37, but they said, should he treat our sister as a harlot? That's their response to him, is they shouldn't have done this. Now, if Jacob had done something about this to begin with, do you think this would have happened? Possibly not. But they saw their dad as just not caring. Their dad never lifted a finger to protect Dinah. And the fact that Dinah was still being held captive and Jacob is sitting at the house negotiating for a dowry, that didn't set well with them, and that's why they took it upon themselves to put a stop to it. But of course, at this point, Jacob figures, you kind of went a little overboard with this, now we got to get out of here.
I think Jacob's a bit of a puss, though, really.
And at this point, that's a good
When
possibility.
he left and then came back when Esau was coming, and he was with Esau, just Laban. I mean, he's running away like crazy.
Jacob has come a long way in his relationship with God, but these stories tell us that even in the midst of Jacob's progression in his relationship with God, he's still got a long way to go.
Do you think they saw this as a sign of weakness in their father?
I think that's exactly what it was. They figured Dad's not going to do anything, we will. Because, of course, what law did they have back then? Point of the sword. All right, questions? All right, well, let's finish up. Mario.
Okay.
Connie.
Okay. 5:33.